So alright guys, I'm out here again today working on this 87 944 turbo. So alright guys, today I'm going to be washing the car and cleaning out this engine bay. I'm hoping to get it polished up and get rid of some of these dings that are in the fender as well. So alright, I have the engine cleaned up now, and as you can see it looks much better than it did before. Now someone was asking me how to clean the cam tower off and if I would give any tips. The best thing I can recommend is really using a good degreaser, and that's going to get most of this stuff off. There are some aluminum cleaners, but I don't really recommend spraying those in the engine bay. Now that said, if you have some of these parts out of the car, then you can go ahead and use them, and that would actually be the best way to clean the engine. Alright, now that I have the engine cleaned up, I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning out the interior. You can see that I still have a mess here from where I installed the radio, and I've been working on the airbags. But the first thing I want to do is go ahead and replace this center console here, and I have one that's in much better condition. Alright, the new console is in and everything's starting to look much better now. So at the moment I'm actually waiting for some parts to come in, and in the meantime I figured I would go ahead and start polishing this car. So as you can see, many of these panels are dull and faded from sitting in the sun, and I just finished polishing this fender. It was in a similar condition. You can see it looks much better now. So alright guys, the other day I finished polishing this paint and it looked pretty good, but unfortunately it rained last night so it's dirty all over again. But today I got the new clutch, master cylinder, and slave cylinder rebuild kit in. And the car's already up on ramps because I had planned to work on it, but I got a call a little while ago and a guy is coming to pick up that black 928. So I've got to get this car off the ramps and move it out of the way so that way he can come pick up that car tomorrow. And over here in this envelope I have the factory workshop manual airbag supplement. So I'm going to be working on that tonight, and hopefully I'm going to get that flashing light on the dash to stay off. So alright guys, I've got the new clutch master cylinder here and the new clutch slave rebuild kit. I quickly read through the airbag supplement and I didn't see any mention of what to do when the airbag light is flashing, so it looks like I'm going to have to dig in deeper into that to see what's going on. So instead of doing that tonight, I just went ahead and removed the old clutch master cylinder, and I'm getting ready to put this one in now. Alright, I've got the new clutch master cylinder in now, and it's buried way down in there. I had to remove half this stuff to get down in there in order to replace it. It's not too bad of a job. It only took me about 45 minutes. And one day I'll try and make a video on how to replace it on a later car and a turbo. But for now I just needed to get it done. And you can see the old one here. And tonight I need to get the car lifted up and get under there and rebuild the clutch slave. So alright, I've got the clutch slave cylinder rebuilt now, and I'm getting ready to install it and start bleeding the clutch. I'm not sure which one of these failed. This one looks like it was rebuilt recently, and the master cylinder wasn't weeping, but every day I would come out and the pedal would be stuck to the floor. I would try and bleed it, and then the next day it was stuck to the floor. So one of these failed. I'm just not sure which one it was, but anyway, should be fixed now. So alright, the slave cylinder is now back in, so I'm going to go ahead and bleed it. Alright guys, I got the clutch bled late last night and it still feels excellent, so I'm glad I've got that fixed. Now, I usually try and go through and show how to replace all these parts, but a lot of times I still get questions about them because they get buried in longer videos. So I just prefer to go back and make specific videos on the parts that I'm installing so that way they don't get lost. But anyway, I've also heard people complaining that a lot of times when they go to bleed their clutch, they can't get fluid to come out. And I'm going to give you some tips on that right quick. So alright guys, I want to give you some tips on bleeding the clutch. Now, as you know, a lot of people tell you that you must have a motive power bleeder, but that really isn't the case. I was able to do this in about 3 minutes last night once I had this done. So I've never taken one of these apart before, but as you can imagine, there are different chambers inside here, and I believe that the clutch also has a separate chamber. So Essentially what happened was I filled this chamber up and there was still no fluid over here in the chamber for the rear brakes. So eventually the fluid started spilling over and this filled up, but I still didn't have any fluid here for the clutch. So I had the car actually jacked up this way with the driver's side raised and no fluid was going in there. So I let it back down on the ground and I kept topping it off until this chamber filled up, and then finally I started getting fluid right here. So if you don't have any fluid here, of course, you're not going to have any fluid getting to your master and slave cylinder. And so once I had fluid in this chamber, I was able to raise the car back up so that way I could get under there and bleed the clutch. And you just want to make sure that you keep it topped off. Once there's fluid in this chamber, you can bleed it very easily, but I think that a lot of people struggle here because they haven't really looked to see if the fluid is getting over here to this point, and you just have to keep filling it up, and it's going to go down as this spills over into here, and then you have to wait for it to spill over into this chamber. Once that's done, bleeding is very simple. So alright guys, now that I've got the clutch bled and it's working perfectly, the next thing I'm going to do is install the final two parts that I have. I still need to work on the airbag, but once I get these installed, then the car should be able to drive on the road. So let's see what we have here in this first package. We have a brand new oxygen sensor. I did notice when I was trying to drive it that until it warms up it wants to stumble, and the oxygen sensor is faulty, so I'll be replacing that. And then here in this box, let's see what we have here. Alright, this looks to be our new electric water pump. I told the owner of this car that it was leaking and didn't run, so he ordered a new replacement because he wanted it done right. So I'll be getting these two in today, and hopefully we can take this car out on the road because that will be just about everything other than the airbags. Alright, I've got the old oxygen sensor out now and I'm getting ready to install the new one. Alright, now that the new oxygen sensor is installed, I'll go ahead and install this new pump. So alright guys, last night I got the new oxygen sensor in, and I also installed the new auxiliary water pump, and it's working now. I was going to take it on test drive since I just picked the plate up today, and unfortunately the windshield wipers aren't working now. I checked the fuse. I do have 12 volts at the fuse, but nothing's happening, so I'm thinking that perhaps the motor is seized up. And as you can see, it's raining out here and it doesn't look like I'm going to get to drive it today. So what I need to do is dig in, try and figure out what's going on with the wipers and see if I can get them freed up, so that way I can either take it on test drive or I have to wait tomorrow when it's sunny. Alright, it looks like it's cleared up just enough that maybe I can take this car around the corner and see what it's like. So alright guys, I just got back from the first test drive and I just circled the block a few times because this car hasn't run in a very long time, and I didn't want to get stuck away from the shop without any tools and no one to come get me. Also, the way the weather has been today, I could get caught in the rain and that wouldn't be good without any wipers. So anyway, I just went far enough to make sure I got the engine up to temperature, and I made sure that it wasn't going to overheat or anything. And I also wanted to make sure it was building boost, and it is. It's building a lot of boost very quickly, so that's good news. Now over the next few days I still have a few things that I need to fix, and at the end of it all I need to drive this car an hour to the owner's house, so this thing has to be in perfect condition. But as it is right now, the engine seems to be in really good shape. but it does feel like a car that hasn't driven in a very long time, and most of that is because it has some very old tires on it, and so the owner's going to have to handle that once it's in his possession. But for right now, I just need to get it to him, and I've got to make sure that everything is working and it's in good shape. Other than that, before then. It's alright guys, I worked late last night, and you may have noticed that the cup wheels are on here now, and that's because the tires on these wheels are a little bit better than the ones that were on the phone dial, so hopefully the car will drive better now. I also checked the voltage at the wiper motor, and I've got a good 12 volts, so unfortunately it looks like I'm going to have to dig in and replace the motor itself, which, as you may know, on the later car, it is a very long job. And then last night I was watching some footage back, and I noticed that the speedometer wasn't working. I didn't notice it at the time, but anyway, I got back there and replaced the speed sensor on the transmission, and I'm hoping that the speedometer will work now. So I'm gonna go take it on a test drive, and we'll just see where everything's at. So yeah, I forgot to mention that I disabled the airbags. So now all the lights on the dash are out, but when I get back, I'll try and make sure that I get that fixed correctly. Alright guys, I'm out on the road now, and the car's driving better with those tires, but as you can see, the speedometer still doesn't work. But everything else seems to be in pretty good shape. If I have time today, I'll see if I can swap this cluster out. So alright guys, today I'm back out here working on this blue 944 turbo. The last time the wiper motor didn't work, so I need to get that out and replace it. And also the speedometer didn't work, so I've got another cluster here that I'm going to be swapping in and seeing if that fixes the issue. It's alright, I'm getting ready to remove this shroud here, and as you can see, I've got the steering wheel removed already. There are 3 Phillips head screws along the top here, 2 here, and 1 over here. Also 2 underneath right there. Once those are removed, then you'll be able to remove this. Alright guys, taking the car on a test drive just to make sure that the speedometer is working, and it is now. Alright, so as I mentioned, I've got the speedometer working now, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this shroud here and get in there and remove the wiper motor. Alright, I now have the wiper motor out, and as you can see, it requires removing the entire blower motor housing. Alright, I have the wiper motor out of the blue turbo now, and you can see just how corroded everything is. It took me a while to finally get this thing out because I had to remove the entire blower motor assembly, and then had to remove this from the bracket before I could even get this out. And you can see it clearly had water down in here, and so I've got to sand all this right here and get it cleaned up, re-grease everything, and then I'm going to try and seal this up to make sure that no water can get back down in there. Alright, so I tore the motor apart, So alright, this motor was in pretty bad condition. I got it running, but about the time I turned the camera on, you could see that it cut off. So I'm just going to go ahead and order another one. Alright guys, I got some parts in today, and I thought I'd open them up so that way you could see what I got. Jelly beans, and I also got a socket that's going to allow me to remove the nuts that hold in the airbag brain and things like that. Got a new dipstick, exactly what I need for my car. I used the wiper motor for that blue turbo, so I'll be able to get the wipers working on it now. I believe that there was something else. Find out though. Yes. Bunch of lug nuts, can never have too many. Alright, so here's the new wiper motor I just received, and you can see it's working perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and get this installed. So alright, I'm going to go ahead and install the new wiper motor, and I'm going to also vacuum up these leaves. It looked like I had this cleaned out pretty well, but once I started removing the blower motor assembly, then all those leaves that were back behind there came out. So I'm going to get that cleaned up before I install this and make it look nice. Alright, that looks a lot better, so I'm going to go ahead and get the wiper motor in now, and then I'll start putting the blower motor assembly back in as well. So I've got the wiper motor and the blower motor assembly back together now. I thought I'd point out a few things so that way you guys will know where this goes in case you lose track of it. First of all, you're going to have a plug up top here, and then you're going to have this vacuum line run across, and it tees off and connects to a nipple down in here. You're also going to have a plug, and it snaps on right there, and then there's this hose that comes off the motor here, and it's going to go into the housing right there. So I thought I'd point that out because as I was assembling it, I had to go look at the other car to make sure I put everything back into place, and so it's easy to lose track of some of this stuff, and I just wanted to make sure you guys knew how to put it back together. But anyway, there's this little plastic piece here, and it looks to be broken, but it isn't. It's just sitting here, and it's held in place by this tape. So once the tape is broken, it just kind of flops around. But anyway, I'm going to be replacing this tape here, and I'm also going to be replacing the cowl that was on here since it has holes in it and a lot of cracks. So I have another one. It's also not in great shape, but I think it's in better condition than the one that was on here. So I'm going to go ahead and clean it up and start putting it on. Alright, I scraped all that old tape off there, and I've applied some new tape. I'm getting ready to go get the cowl and install it. Alright, so I got everything back together now, and as you can see, I replaced the cowl. This one doesn't have quite as many holes as the other one did. I also replaced this trim piece here. It was missing when I got the car, so I just pulled one off the parts car. So I'm going to go ahead and reattach the battery here, and we'll try the wipers out. Alright, so now that everything's back together, I need to test them, and I don't want these old wiper blades, you can see there's not much left of them, scratching up the glass. So I'm just going to stand them up like this, and then I'll turn the wiper on, and we now have working wipers. Alright, now that the wipers are working, there's still a few things I need to do to this car. I want to touch up the needles that are on the gauges in there, and I'll be showing you guys how to do that. I also want to get the airbags working correctly. Right now I have them jump so the light's out, but they won't activate if there is an accident, and I'd like to get them working properly. So I'm going to see if that's possible. I actually have the tool, as you saw. and I'm going to be removing the brain and testing everything the best I can anyway. And then I need to make sure that this car is running 100% perfectly by taking it out on a road test, and then we'll go from there. So alright, what I'm working on now is removing this cluster again, and I'm not sure if you can see, but there's some sun fading on this boost needle and the speedometer needle. So I'm going to be replacing these with some nicer needles, and alternatively you can paint them, but it's a much more delicate process, and while I have this cover off I'll go ahead and clean it up as well. So alright, I've got both clusters sitting here. You can see this one here has a bunch of fading, and what I'd like to do is make this look a lot better. This cluster here looks perfect, but the speedometer and the fuel gauge doesn't work. So what I may do is just go ahead and swap out all these faces and all these needles to make everything look perfect. And I have a tool here that's going to help me with these needles, and then you'll just need a screwdriver to remove the faces. So before I can remove the faces, I need to get these needles off, and I'll need to make sure that I put them exactly back where they belong, or else the gauge will read wrong. And you can see that most of these gauges have the needle when it rests sitting right below the markings. And if you don't get these put back on there exactly right, then it'll be slightly off. So I don't want that. So these over here are the faces that I'm going to be using, and I've used some painter's tape that will easily come off. And then I've got the needle pointing exactly at the middle of this tape here. So once I remove these needles and I remove the faces, I'll be able to put them back on exactly where they belong. Alright, I have the cluster that I'll be using put back together now. Alright, so I got the gauge cluster put back together last night, and everything looks much better now and works properly. You may have noticed that I removed this plastic cover here, and if you do that, you'll need to glue it back together. I actually used the plastic glue to put it all back together, and it was sort of rubbery. You want to make sure that you use something like that, and don't use super glue, because the super glue can actually fog this up, and then you'll have to break it apart to get it back apart again, and have to scrape all that back off, which could end up damaging this. So just make sure that you use a plastic glue and not a super glue, because it could potentially ruin this. Alright, now that the wipers are working and the cluster is repaired, I thought I'd get back to working on the airbags. You can see that I have the airbag computer sitting out here, and in order to remove it, you'll need a rip nut socket. These cost about $80 and $10 shipping. So once you have that, you can easily remove the computer. And what I've been doing is just running some tests. You can see that I have it unplugged here, and that's how I had the light off, was basically I just disabled it and then put a jumper in here so that way I could still drive the car. But anyway, this here is the passenger side crash sensor, and I'll try and get some light up there. And in order to test this, you'll need to Get your multimeter out and then set it to 20,000 ohms. And this socket down there at the bottom is number 1. And then this one here on the right side is number 2. You're going to check the resistance between these two and you should get 10,000 ohms. And then you're going to check the resistance between 2 and 3 here, and it should read infinite. So anyway, once you test the resistance, that should tell you whether or not the crash sensor is still good. And actually, I was getting ready to pull this computer and try swapping it out, but if you'll notice here, it looks like some of these prongs are bent, and I'm not exactly sure if this couldn't be the issue. Perhaps it didn't get a crash sensor reading from this side, and that was causing the light to flash. So what I'm going to do is try and bend these back into position and plug everything in and see if the light goes out. All right, I have everything hooked back up now, and honestly, I'm not expecting this to really fix the issue, but at least now I'll know that the wiring is good and the crash sensors are good, and then I can take steps from there. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and connect the battery, and maybe this worked, and if it does, I might just have to clear a code or something, but let's find out. So alright, I just hooked the battery up, and as you can see, the airbag light is still flashing, but at least now I know that the crash sensors and the wiring is good. And I've also swapped out this airbag here, so that's not the issue, and then I replaced the clock spring as well. So the only thing that it could be is the control unit itself or these airbags here. Unfortunately, it's not throwing a code, so I'm thinking that it is probably going to be the control unit, and pulling it is not going to be a fun task. So alright, last night I pulled the control unit out of the blue car, and I've tried swapping airbags, I changed the clock spring, and I've even checked the wiring, and I even checked the resistance on the crash sensors. So everything is working correctly. The only thing I can think it is this control unit. So today I'm going to be pulling one out of this black car, and I'm going to be swapping it in, and hopefully that's going to fix the issue. So alright guys, while I've got this control unit here, I thought it'd be a good time to go through and tell you about the wiring and where it's located. So the first thing we have here is the passenger side crash sensor plug, and this is located up near the altitude sensor. Next, you're going to find this main plug, and it's going to be mounted right next to the control unit. This Molex connector here is for diagnostics and things like that, and if you want to reset the codes, you're going to use that center pin there and then follow the directions in the factory workshop manual. And then you can see that we have two other sets of wires coming out here. This one here goes to the passenger side airbag, so it's just going to run underneath the dash and above the glove box there. Next you have this wiring here, and this goes back behind the HVAC system in the interior. And then you're going to have the driver's side crash sensor plug, and then you have the clock spring connector here. So this all runs back behind the dash, and then this is going to run over next to the fender well on the driver's side, and this is going to run up towards the steering wheel. Alright, as I mentioned, I'm going to be removing the control unit in this car, and hopefully that's going to fix the issue. Now the first thing I want to do is go ahead and unplug the main harness there and the impact sensor. Then there's a bunch of clips underneath here, and I'll have to unplug the airbag, so I'm going to remove the glove box, and that'll also give me a lot more room to work when I go to remove the unit itself. Then I'll need to remove the wiring over here on the driver's side, and you can see that the clock spring plug is already sitting there, so I just need to pull that out. Then I'll need to unplug the crash sensor on the driver's side, and then there's a bunch of zip ties and clips holding it in, and I'll have to unclip all those. And once that's done and I get everything pulled out, then I can just pull it through behind the console there, and then I'll be ready to remove the control unit. Alright, last night I pulled all the cables out, and today I just need to remove the nuts that are up here. So as you can see, these aren't ordinary nuts, and that's why I needed to order this tool. Alright, here's both units. This is the one that I removed from the blue car, and this is the one I'm going to be testing. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hook everything up and try it out before I try and installing it permanently. Alright, before I go to all the trouble of installing the control unit permanently, I thought I would just hook everything up and test it out. You can see I've got the wires laid out right here. So everything's hooked up now. I'm going to go ahead and turn the key on. And the airbag light is on, but it isn't flashing anymore, so that is a very good sign. So with the engine running, you can see that the airbag light is illuminated solid now. So it does have a code, but at least now I should be able to figure out what's wrong and reset it. So alright guys, with the old control unit, the light was flashing rapidly, and I actually read everything in the factory service manual, and I saw absolutely nothing on what to do when the airbag light is flashing rapidly. So I think that's a sign that the control unit is bad. And I've got this one swapped in now, and the light was staying on solid, but that's just telling me that there was probably a fault. And when I found this control unit, the passenger side airbag was disconnected, and I think it stores that fault permanently until it's reset, even if you disconnect the battery. So what I did was I used Clark's Garage to clear the faults, and the airbag light is now out. So if you're having a problem with a flashing airbag light, it is probably going to be the control unit is bad. And I'll go ahead and start it up for you. See, the airbag light comes on. And goes out. So everything's working perfectly now. That's great news. I'm going to move on to working on some other things now. So alright, now that I have the airbags working properly, I went ahead and reinstalled the control unit exactly like the factory had it, so no one should ever know. But anyway, that's just about going to do it for this episode. Next time, I'm going to be fixing the AC and a few other things before returning this car to the owner. I want to thank everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, since these videos wouldn't be possible without you. But anyway, that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.